Hi, today we're going to get down to brass tacks and talk about the 7 key numbers in any and every business. Now don't get me wrong, there are many numbers that you ought to be monitoring and managing within your business. Trust me, there's an expression, what gets measured gets managed, what gets managed is measured. And therefore there are a whole host of key matrix that you might want to be able to set up on either an Excel spreadsheet or some form of CRM to be able to monitor anything that's got a number to it really, or can have a number attributed to it. It might be the amount of outbound phone calls that you make, the amount of inbound inquiries that you receive. It might be your conversion rate over the phone as compared to in a room one-to-one. It might be looking at your Facebook posts and their interactions and finding out as to how many positive, negative or neutral responses that you get and the response that you have when you follow up with those. It might be your spend on newspaper advertising or on a podcast and finding out as to how many listeners to it, how many contribute or give feedback, how many share it somewhere else. There are a whole host of matrix that we should be measuring in a business. These are the 7 key numbers that I really need to be able to ensure that you know and have a method of being able to manage and review on a daily, weekly, monthly basis in order to ensure that you are growing and not going broke. That you are growing as a business without running out of cash at the same time. So first of all, revenue. Yes, it is sometimes referred to as a vanity matrix, how much money can we invoice. But there is one method of being able to establish as to whether we are growing. It's looking at month by month, year by year, and saying, are we invoicing more and more and more each time? Have our invoice value gone up? Are we sending more invoices for larger fees to more people on a more frequent basis? Are we looking at not necessarily just revenue, but the growth of revenue? So first of all, turnover against previous month, against previous quarter, against same time last year, but then also invoice value and measuring a matrix against previous years in order to be able to establish that the curve is heading in the right direction. Yes, turnover is just a vanity number in itself, but yet when we measure it against other matrix, like I say, previous year's turnover, previous month's turnover, average invoice value, we can start to give some real indications to establish as to whether we're starting to see growth in the business or in actual fact if it's stagnated. Number 2 is about fixed costs, and I'm always alarmed when I start working with a new client when you start asking them about their fixed costs and they haven't given everything due consideration. It's almost a case of if it costs less than £100 a month, it almost doesn't register with people to be able to ensure that it is recorded as a fixed cost in the business. So what are fixed costs? Well, things that you have to pay for regardless of whether you are selling a product or service or not. So salaries, rent or mortgage, or a lease value. It might be that you've got a company car or some form of mode of transport. It might be that you're paying for your website and your web development and your hosting, your email provider, or Outlook 365 or something else, or your marketing system, your CRM. It might be that you're paying for a telephone and mobile phones. There are a whole series of fixed costs in the business which you will end up having to pay for, your insurance, your accountant and all that type of thing, regardless of whether you turn over a penny or whether you turn over £1 million. There are some fixed costs in the business that just by being in business you incur on a weekly, monthly, quarterly or annual basis. So knowing what they are on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis and understanding that before anything, when you invoice that first invoice and realise that in actual fact all of that has been eaten up by paying the electricity bill, the next invoice that goes out and all of that has been eaten up by paying off the council tax for the year. The third invoice goes out and all of that's been eaten up by your mobile phone bill. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, when do I get paid? And the simple fact is that, there are a set of fixed costs that you have to pay in order to be in business, regardless of what invoice value or frequency of invoice goes out the door. So fixed costs, know them, monitor them, manage them, establish as to whether you can find a means of being able to reduce some or become more cost effective by either paying up front or paying monthly. Collaborate, find out if there's a means of being able to have a cheaper, like we often do with our house. It might be that you're on a dual tariff and it becomes cheaper to be able to pay for electricity and gas at the same time. Well, there's a whole myriad of things that you might want to do with your fixed costs to establish, one, are they all relevant? Are they all still applicable to you and your business in terms of insurances and the likes? And ensuring that you review them regularly to ensure that you've still got a good deal compared to what it was when you first took it out. So obviously number 2 being fixed costs. Number 3 is very quickly going to move into variable costs. And this becomes a lot more complex because it's now determining as to if you're buying a product and selling a product, if you're buying in bulk and selling in individual units, then there's a cost of purchasing that product in the first place, of which you've then got to do a labour charge to perhaps break it down from large units to small individual units, and storage costs and the likes, and then a sales cost, maybe postage or delivery, attributed to the individual item being sold at the end of the day. But then as a service, if you're a service-based business and you're not selling a product, you've still got variable costs. You've still got we deliver a number of workshops. Now, for the workshops, when we deliver them physically, there is the cost of renting a room to deliver it into, providing some refreshments, a printed manual, a workbook for each person attending. There'll be a marketing spend on being able to attract people to come to that in the first place, and all of those are attributed to that particular product or service. And therefore, these are variable costs because they vary depending on the outcome. If we're paying for one coffee for one customer, it's £3 or £4. If we've got 50 people on the course, then all of a sudden it's £200 or £300 to be able to provide the refreshments. There's no point being able to turn around and say that's a fixed cost because it's dependent on how many cups of coffee we end up buying for people. So variable costs are a little bit more complex to be able to work out, but just as important to be able to establish as to where the money's going within a business. It was interesting, I remember working with a photographer a few years ago, and they'd done all of the pricing, it was reasonable, but hadn't given due considerations to either fixed costs or variable costs in terms of travel. And you can't charge the same fee for delivering a photography on site 20 miles around the corner as you could driving to London to deliver it. Because the simple fact is, you're going to be in the car for probably 7 hours to be able to go from Manchester, where he was based, down to London. You've got the cost of fuel and of depreciation of the vehicle. You've got car parking to give considerations to. If you're going to be out the office for that long, then you're probably going to need some refreshment along the way, either breakfast and lunch and an evening meal. That's a long day. It might be that you have to allow a member of staff off the following day. If they've done all of that in a day, they've done 7 hours driving and a 3, 4, 5 hour photo shoot, then it might be that there's some overtimes to give considerations to, or perhaps some time in lieu the following day. All of that has to be given consideration based on that job. And you can't just simply turn around and say, well, it's a fixed cost, because it isn't. We don't know as to what those costs are until the client has booked that particular service with that particular photographer, and this is the distance to travel, and these are the costs directly incurred in delivering that service. So variable costs become a little bit more difficult, but massively important to be able to monitor and manage to establish that you've got them all taken into consideration. Now, once you've got those things in place, once you've been able to determine as to your pricing policy and how much you're going to charge for things, and ensuring that you're pricing effectively and efficiently a profitable business, you've given due considerations to all of your fixed costs and the variable costs depending on which product or service that you're selling and where you're selling it to, and you've got these margins all laid out in an Excel spreadsheet. Now you can establish what's your break-even point. And what I mean by that is, how much money have you got to make every year, or every quarter, or every month, or every week, every day, every hour? How much money have you got to make in order for the business to continue to remain profitable? Now, although it doesn't work this way, I'm just going to overemphasize a point just to be able to prove something to you. As a limited business, you as a director and primary shareholder of, you have a legal responsibility to be able to declare that your business is still profitable and capable of trading, continuing to trade. It is still in a profitable position in order to be able to trade. And it shouldn't trade if it's trading non-profitable. Not non-profitable. It shouldn't trade if it's cash deficient and unable to sustain itself, is what I'm looking for. So let's assume that you've invoiced somebody on a 30 days notice payment period. You've done the work on day one and you've sent the invoice for £1,000. You're not going to get paid for 30 days, and let's assume that they pay on time. But the cost of that job was 500 quid, both in terms of fixed costs and variable costs. We've clumped those together, and the cost of that is £500. And we're not going to get paid for another 29 days. And then on day two, you go and do another job, and you invoice for £1,000, and ironically, you've sent them the same 30 days notice period, and the job still comes in and it costs you about £500. You're now £1,000 out of pocket. And although you've got £2,000 owing, you haven't been paid that yet. Now, if you were to continue to do that all month, you've already spent £10,000 that month in actual costs before the first invoice gets paid. And it's only on day 11, on invoice payment 11, which might be 41 days after the first job was delivered, if they all pay on time, that you've covered your actual costs in the business. And the risk here is that you could run out of money in actual costs. You can't afford to be able to put fuel in the tank to be able to get to job 29, because you've already done jobs 1 to 28 and spent the money and still haven't recovered any money back. And this is called the burn rate, the speed in which you get through money compared to the speed in which you recover money back. And if there's anything that causes more businesses more financial hardship, it's a really, really quick burn rate. It's people being able to spend money on a day-to-day basis, an invoice on a month-by-month basis, hoping that the client pays on time. Now, ironically, a study was done by the Chamber of Commerce probably about 10 or 11 years ago now. I think a subsequent one has been done by the Federation of Small Businesses about 6 or 7 years ago now, and found out that the average time it takes from invoicing on a 30-day notice period, the average time for payment is 47 days. Well, if you've based your whole business profitability on being paid on your 30th day, you've got a problem, because you're 17 days broke before the first one pays. And that's based on averages. So knowing what your break-even point is, knowing as to how much money you've got to have in the bank and when it has to be in the bank by, or at any time, in order that you can at least sustain the business whilst awaiting payments to be made, is really key to being able to understand and be able to go forward with some form of strength and confidence without having to put some cash back in from your own pocket every now and again to subsidise for other people's late or tardy payments. A break-even point, an understanding as to what that is on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis, and saying how quickly can I build up a cash reserve that says at a moment's notice, if somebody doesn't pay on the time, I know I can dip into my business rainy day fund and cover those costs to continue trading, being able to put fuel back in the tank and food in my mouth whilst we're waiting for those invoices to get paid. So a break-even point and understanding what that is and the implication of it is key. And again, there was two built into each other there, because the other one was understanding a burn rate, the rate in which you are spending money compared to the rate in which you are receiving money and not allowing one to overtake the other. Otherwise, it's referred to in business as growing broke. What a weird term. How on earth do you grow broke? Well, it's easy. You continue to win new work in, of which you invoice on a 30, 45, 60, 90 days terms I've seen people issue. Can you pay me in the next 3 or 4 months, please? Meanwhile, you've got bills to pay. You've got salaries to pay. You've got electricity and internet and fuel and food. And it doesn't matter how much money's outstanding. If you've run out of cash to put fuel in the bank and food in your belly, in the meantime, you're broke. You're over. You're done. So it's about understanding the speed in which we spend money compared to the speed in which we recover money, and not allowing one to overtake the other so sufficiently that that rainy day fund, that safety net that we've built up, is impacted so significantly that there's no cash left. I'm a firm believer that for every year in business, we ought to be contributing significantly more to that rainy day fund. Now, don't get me wrong, you might argue that to have a significant cash reserve is foolish when it could be perhaps better spent in being able to generate more business. But again, if generating more business is putting a restriction or a strain on the speed in which money's coming in compared to going out, and you haven't got the reserves to be able to support that, then in actual fact, there's no point growing a business because you're growing broke. So understanding burn rate and accepting the fact that we've got to be able to monitor and manage the speed in which we grow so as not to grow or go broke is a key number that we all need to ensure that we know. And I'm a firm believer that for every 100,000 that we get to, we ought to be adding about 3 to 4 weeks additional to that cash reserve. By the time you get to 500,000 turnover, you ought to have at least I believe that you ought to be working towards a 3-month reserve in any size of business. 3-month cash reserve for your fixed costs that you can at least cover salaries and rent and the likes for up to 90 days should an accident or problem occur, and that there is a delay in being able to recover payments. So know what your fixed term costs are, fixed rate costs are, times that by 3. Your monthly fixed rate cost, and times it by 3 and say, well, that's what my first goal, my first milestone is, to be able to build a reserve of having at least that in reserves at any one time should it be necessary. And then I firmly believe that for every £100,000 in business beyond that, as a rough number, obviously it all depends on size of your business and how many widgets you sell and how much you sell them for, but certainly on average for every £100,000 beyond that you ought to be adding another month to those 3-month reserves, working towards having a year in reserves of fixed asset costs, fixed rate costs, should it ever be necessary, should the proverbial hit the fan and COVID all of a sudden lock down the world. Because ironically, there are many, many businesses that are really, really struggling right now because they didn't have that reserve in the first place. So the other two that I wanted to quickly cover off here today is the cost of goods sold. Now, don't get me wrong, if it's a product, that's really easy. I can establish as to how much I paid for it. I might have paid for a box of 50 and I'm now going to break them down and sell them as individual units. But the cost of goods sold, how much did it cost me to be able to deliver that to them in the first place? But again, you've also got this in service costs. It might be that we charge X per day for our services, but ironically, the deliverer of that service isn't going to earn 100% of that. There'll be a salary, there'll be some tax and national insurance contributions to be made, there'll be some fixed term asset costs within the business and some variable costs for the delivery. Then there's a profit margin that has to be given considerations to. Some of the business needs to be able to generate an income and put some cash in reserves in order to be able to cover my holiday pay and sick pay and all that type of malarkey. So I always suggest that in a service-based business, the cost of delivery shouldn't be more than 35% of the price of sale. What I mean by that is whatever it costs for me to go and deliver it, my delivery of training or my delivery of service, whatever that might be, ought to come to about 35% tops of the overall cost of sale. And the rest of it covers the cost of salaries and cost of and profitability and tax and insurance and all that type of malarkey. But the cost of the delivery, the variable cost of delivery, shouldn't come to, including the salary of the person delivering it, shouldn't be more than or much more than 35% of the overall cost of delivery. And then finally, we can talk about both gross and net profit and understand what the difference is between the two. So first of all, what's gross profit? Well, it's all about being able to understand as to what we have billed, our revenue, minus our fixed costs. So the profit margin between the two is, I've billed £100,000. It's cost me £61,000 to be able to deliver that. There's £39,000 gross profit. So what's net profit? Well, net profit's removing everything else from that equation, taking away salaries, taking away tax contributions and national insurance contributions. It's taking away all of the fixed and variable costs. It's being able to look at everything in the business, including if we've got shareholder agreements as to how much shareholders or venture capitalists are expecting as a return on their initial investments, removing all of the other costs from the business and finding out as to what you're left with that is subsequently either dividend payments for shareholders or net profit, which can be subsequently reintroduced and reimbursed into the business in order for us to be able to grow again the following year. But you've got to have a good understanding of the 7 key numbers in the business to understand as to, can you make some of the decisions that you want to be able to make without either risking going or growing broke. The only other one thing I wanted to quickly share with you while we're talking about numbers is understanding some other numbers in the business that are going to be key to supporting the 7 numbers that we've just discussed. So first of all, number of inquiries. How many times does a phone ring and somebody say, I'd be interested in some further information about you and your business? Another one is conversion rate. Of those inquiries, how many of them become customers? How many don't become customers? They've made an initial inquiry, but it didn't subsequently convert to becoming a client. And do we need to be able to tweak our conversion rates? Do we need to be able to learn more about how to be able to improve that for every time the phone rings, we're able to be able to make a sale? Obviously, that would be the ideal and rather unrealistic, but to the same extent, that's what we need to be working towards. So how many calls come in on a regular basis? How many inquiries come in for potential of further work? And then subsequently, how often do we convert that into work? The next one is, what type of work do we convert it into? Is it a one-off sale or a continual sale? Is it a one-off purchase or an ongoing program? What's the value of that sale? How much do we sell on day one? How much do we subsequently sell over what sort of time period? What's the speed in which they come back as a returning customer and buy from us again? Are they going to buy a one-off product and then come back a year or 2 years later? Or are they going to come back every week or every day? Or are they going to sign up for a subscription model? And then the length of time that they spend with us before they've determined that, thanks very much, that was enough. I've done what I needed to do and I'm going to move on now. So how long are they with us overall? Have I got a 1-year relationship with this client? Do they stay for 3 or 4 or 5 or 12 or 15 years and continues to spend money with us regularly? And then we can look at that and say that's the lifetime value of a customer. And what do I need to be able to do? One, to improve the lifetime value of clients that haven't yet stayed with us for 12, 13, 15 years. But also, when we give considerations to the level of service that we deliver on day one, when we start to give considerations to what we are prepared to give to this client in return for their choice to be able to do business with us in the first place. It's not about them spending £100 a month. It's about what that £100 a month becomes over the next 12, 13, 15 years. I always say to somebody that although this is a little bit of a COVID cut at the moment and not necessarily my usual style, when I sit in a barber's chair, I'm not paying 15 quid for a haircut. It's a £500 a year haircut. Now don't get me wrong, I have my haircut more than once and it doesn't cost 500 quid. But every time I sit in that chair and I'm paying my £15, if you look at how many times a year I have my hair cut, and how frequently I have my hair cut, and how frequently I happily give them £15, and you subsequently realise that I'm a 520 pound a year customer. My current barber I've been with for 3 years, so my lifetime value is about £1,500 for that £15 haircut. Because ironically, how much goodwill have you built up in 3 years that the time that you get it wrong and you clip me ear and it bleeds and somebody slips with the scissors and there's a cut in the back, or what has to happen for that loyalty values to disappear and for me to decide, you know what, now's the time I might go and try a different £15 haircut down the road. It's not about the £15, it's about the lifetime value and understanding that every time I sit in the chair, you've got the chance to be able to build on that £1,500 relationship or risk losing it all. They're the 7 key numbers. I hope you found that of use. Don't forget to keep coming back and looking for more of our videos. We've got a mass array of things that we want to be able to share with you in order for us to be able to share with you how to be able to add a zero to your personal disposable income. That's Jay Allen from My True North. Look forward to speaking again soon. Take care.